Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our speaking event today about bold leadership and what it takes to succeed at the top. My name is Kaveh Kushnut. I'm an associate professor at Yale School of Public Health. I'm the faculty director for Innovate Health Yale, known as IHY. We provide mentorship and some funding opportunities for student teams who are passionate about solving public health and education challenges, especially in low-income communities in the United States and also in low-middle-income countries. Our featured guests today are Danielle Kling, Yale School of Public Health alumna from the class of 1996. Danielle is an operating partner with a venture firm that specializes in consumer technology and has prior experience in healthcare consulting. Danielle, thank you for being with us. We're also excited to have Carrie C. Butt. She's the CEO of Simple Health, a company focused on making it convenient for people to access reproductive health and wellness. Carrie, thank you so much for being here. Danielle and Carrie are both leaders in their industries, and they have inspiring career journeys and insights to share with us today. Before we jump in, I'm going to ask our two other discussion hosts to introduce themselves. Howie, why don't you go first, and then Fatima.
Thanks very much. And it's really a pleasure and honor to be here, and extending my personal thanks to Danielle and Carrie as well. I'm Howie Foreman. I'm a radiologist in the medical school, but I've been a professor of public health in the School of Public Health since 2003. I run our healthcare management program in the School of Public Health, and I run our MD MBA and our MPH MBA programs at Yale University, while also teaching health policy and running our executive MBA program, healthcare track at the School of Management.
Thank you, Howie. Hi, everyone. I'm Fatima Basrai. I'm the Director of Innovation for Innovate Health Yale, and excited to lead the first round of discussion today. So welcome again, Danielle and Carrie, and thank you so much for everyone for joining us. So we'd love to start this off with kind of a conversation about your personal career journeys. So I'll kick it off with a question, and then either one of you, please feel free to jump in. Can you start off by telling us the story of your professional career, and how do you describe the work that you do today, and what kind of led you to where you are today?
Okay, I'll start. As was mentioned, I have an MPH from Yale, and I actually went straight from undergrad to Yale for my MPH. And I had a psychology degree, and I knew that I always wanted to be in healthcare, but more on the business side versus the clinical side. So after Yale, I moved to San Francisco and worked at Deloitte & Touche in their healthcare actuarial consulting practice, where I performed HEDIS audits for large employer healthcare plans, which it was great training for me, but it wasn't the most interesting work. So after that, I went to work for the Permanente company, which is the private arm of Kaiser Permanente. And it's basically the Kaiser doctors invested in a fund, and we were like an internal venture capital firm for them. So we actually managed and helped them invest their money. So I learned a lot on the financial side of healthcare management there. And then after that, after being in the strictly healthcare industry for many, many years, I made a huge career shift. I went to work for Williams-Sonoma Inc. And I've always loved home decor and retail in general. It's a personal passion of mine. So it was an opportunity for me to sort of marry my personal passion as well as my professional passion. So at Williams-Sonoma, it's a vertically integrated company, and there are several brands. And I knew in studying retail in the company that in order to move to the top, I needed to be a merchandiser. So I needed to understand all facets of it. Merchandising in any type of retail organization is sort of the hub of the wheel. So, you know, I dealt with sourcing, supply chain, marketing, social, et cetera, et cetera. So at the end of the day, I ran the direct channel for Potty Barn. So I had a very large P&L reporting into me. And And based on my previous work experience in my education, I was able to rise to the top really quickly because I'd had that experience before. So I shot to the top, and I had 2 kids along the way, and I actually quit there several times. I would just be like, oh my God, I gotta go. It was super, super intense. Running an e-commerce business, you are on 24/7. No holiday is sacred. It's very measurable. You're changing the homepage, you're changing your marketing, you're changing your social on the drop of a dime. So I was crazy. And, you know, my kids were growing up and my husband had a huge job. So, you know, other people were raising our kids. And he finally said to me, it's you or me. One of us just needs to take a break. So I said I would take a break. And it was really hard for me to get off the speeding train. I gave them 9 weeks notice. I left the building 2 days before so I wouldn't have to say goodbye to anybody, and, you know, drove home to my house crying like, I can't believe I'm doing this, because my self-identity, my self-worth, everything I had done had been wrapped up in my career. So it was really hard to come home and not have that third-party affirmation of, you know, good presentation, good job, you made your numbers, here's your bonus, where your kids are like, I hate my dinner, you know, drive me to school tomorrow. And, you know, you don't get that at home. So it took me a while to sort of decompress and like figure out what I wanted to do. And so the next chapter of my career was, I met with Eric Kim, and he is a Yalie as well. And he started a firm called Goodwater Capital, which is invested in Carrie's company. And I'm currently an operating partner for them. And it's the perfect like work-life balance for me. And it is super interesting. It's challenging for me. I get to advise awesome companies like Carrie's. I get to mentor women in the workforce, which I really, really liked. It was one of the things in my previous career that I loved, is sort of managing, promoting, and mentoring young women and their career path, and, you know, talking to them about how I juggled being a mom, being a senior executive, being a wife, being a friend, being a sister. So I really enjoy that. So that's currently what I'm doing, and it's the perfect fit for me because not only is it right local, I have a very short commute, but it's consumer technology focused and a lot of health tech. So Goodwater is investing in a lot of health tech. So my MPH and my healthcare background is really coming to fruition in this next stage of my career.
Thanks so much, Danielle. Carrie, love to
Still
hear from
working
you.
on that mute button 19 months later. First of all, I just want to say thank you everyone for having me here today. Really appreciate it. We'd love to say, let's have an open and honest dialogue and have fun. Ask us all the questions you need to. I always tell everyone, if I'm going to do it, I want the students to learn from it. So Carrie Stuber, my pronouns are she, her, hers, currently CEO of Simple Health. My background is started off in investment banking. After 5 years, went to Stanford, worked at American Express. At American Express, I was not very challenged. And so I took it upon myself to have brain surgery. And so I have a disease called dystonia. So I've lived in the healthcare system literally since I was 12, and have seen the underbelly, good and bad, of everything that goes on in healthcare. So during that 8-hour surgery, I made a commitment to the universe that 2 things I want to do is I would dedicate my life to the business of health and wellness. I was never going to be a trainer, as well as running a 10K. Needless to say, I've run 13 half marathons, 2 full marathons. And after I started walking again, I went to work at Equinox Fitness Clubs as director of FP&A. Did that for a couple of years, then went to work at Stanford in their entrepreneurship program. Then I did some wearable tech. And then lastly was in Canada. And when I was working at a healthcare company in Toronto, I ran the New York City Marathon. And I ran at mile 23 right in front of Mount Sinai, which is where I had my brain surgery. And I saw literally an apparition of myself being wheeled out with these 2 ugly band-aids on my bald head. And I fell to my knees and I'm like, Carrie, what are you doing? You do these jobs, you like none of them. Go find something that you really are passionate about. So I quit my job and moved back home because there's just so much innovation going on in the US versus Toronto. So if anyone's Canadian, don't mean to be offensive. And I just was like, I need to get back to the US. There's just too much going on. So at the end of 2019, I met the management team at Simple Health. I met with Eric, as Danielle said, another board member, and started my job as CEO of Simple Health on February 24th, and haven't had a day off since. So all kidding aside, that it's been a journey, as Danielle said. When you do anything tech related, it is 24/7. I do love what I do though, because on a daily basis, I get personally emails from patients thanking us for what we do. And I want to be clear with this audience here, Danielle, close your ears, but it was never about giving ROI and putting up numbers for the board. It truly was meeting our patients where we're at in these unprecedented times. It just happened that by doing that, I did grow the company by 900% year over year, which if I knew now what I knew then, I might have slowed down growth a little bit. But no, we had patients in need and we just were able to deliver on it. And so I'm truly grateful that I was running the ship and that I had a team that worked just as hard as I did to support us meeting our patients' expectations. So
Thank you, Carrie, for sharing that. Thank you both for sharing your inspiring careers and journeys so far. So you both touched on this a little bit. Maybe we can go deeper with this question. Um, how did you originally become interested in healthcare and public health, and why is it so meaningful for you to do the work that you do today?
then yeah, I'll take that one. Then I'll punt it to you. Like I said, like since 12, I've been in and out of hospitals. My disease went undiagnosed for about 2 or 3 years. It's still very rare. And so the one thing I always said to myself is I completely fortunate that I had parents that could afford to, you know, take me to different specialists. But the harder part, I think that the thing I learned that really drew me to coming back into working in healthcare is the fact that like you really have to be your own advocate. And we take it for granted because we all have healthcare insurance, but receiving proper healthcare truly is an issue in the US. And so even if I can change 1/100th of what's going on in the country, I feel like I've been able to really contribute to helping people get better access. But again, it's really personal for me. But I always say the best leaders are the people that work and do something that's personal into a passion, make it professional. And so I wake up every day inspired to figure out like how many more people can I help with their reproductive healthcare needs.
Yeah, and I've never been more proud to have an MPH, actually, just in light of what's been happening over the past 2 years. It's such an honor, and people are like, wow. So just having any type of healthcare degree or having been in the industry or in the industry is such an honor. I feel like you will always have a job if you're in healthcare. Obviously, it is one of the most important things in our world, and it's never going to go away. So I really, really like that. And at the end of the day, I'm an operational person. I'm an operational partner, and I can sell pillows very easily to you, or a couch. But it's a lot more rewarding to work in the healthcare field, and actually when the end product of what you're doing is a patient.
So let me just add my 2 cents here. I think Danielle is being very coy. So Danielle and I talk on a weekly basis. Danielle, when we started, when I took the job, I said to the board, and I'm telling these stories because I want just people to know, I said, I'm a good business person. I don't know marketing. I don't like marketing. I am at a loss for marketing. And Eric was like, you need to get on the phone with Danielle right away. Trust me, she's a marketing guru and genius. So we hit it off, and Danielle is 100% right. She was like, always supported me as a woman CEO. And so, 90% of the time we're able to make our meetings, but we do meet weekly. And what Danielle has done is bring that sort of e-commerce regimen that she's had, and we'll laugh about it in pillows, but what she's done is taken that wisdom and been able to like be a mentor to me to say, what, Carrie, have you thought about this? Have you thought about this? Have you thought about this? So I always feel like, Danielle and I are a winning team, just because Danielle does have that, I would say, that e-com experience, that marketing experience, that when you're running a D2C healthcare company, as it stands today, having someone like Danielle be a mentor has only been able to have us be that much more successful. And Danielle's sharp too. She asks me all the tough questions. She doesn't hold back. And again, like I say that because that's what makes me a good leader today, right? Like I need people to ask me questions where I have a little sweat coming off my forehead. But that's really what's been great is that Danielle, Eric, and other board members have pushed me where I honestly, a year and a half ago, had no idea I can even enter that territory. And sitting here today, knowing that, we're going to grow another probably 100% is just unfathomable to myself that we've been able to do this. So thank you, Danielle.
Oh, absolutely. And I love our relationship. And those of you who are on the call, I strongly advise having a person, maybe not within your organization or maybe in a different function within your organization, that you can bounce ideas off of. You can be real. You can say, I messed up on this, or I did great on this. What do you think? And it's just so comforting to work with Carrie and just be fully blunt, and she's blunt with me. I'll give her my opinion and my advice, and she might not take it. She'll be like, no. And I'm like, okay, well, this is what I think. And she's the CEO. The buck stops with her. But it's been such a good relationship that we've had over, the past year and a half. And she really, truly is one of the fastest rising women CEOs. And to your own horn, Carrie, can you tell them about the award you just got?
I can, even though I was very upset because I'm so competitive. JP Morgan, who does our commercial banking, sent me this award to apply for, one of being the top 50 fastest, most women-led organizations in the country. And I applied for it. And when I found out I was in the top 50, I was so beyond excited. When I found out I was number 2, I was excited for a second. And I was like, how much does it take to be number 1? So, again, like I'm super proud of, the accomplishments we did. And it was awesome because it was at a women presence organization event. So I felt bad because I had a full audience who can connect with my product. And so I had a great conversation with a lot of those women. But yes, I did get some recognition for that. So thank you, Danielle.
Well deserved.
Congratulations. And it's so awesome to hear about the mentorship aspect playing such a big role in the work that you do. Danielle, what have you had? Can you just speak about an experience that you've had with mentorship? You're the mentor to Carrie, and she shared all the wisdom that you've imparted. How has that played into your career?
I think, and I was a big mentor when I was at Williams-Sonoma Inc. as well. And what I stressed to the people who would request me is I actually liked it if they were from a different function, because if they were on my team, it's a different relationship because, I'm their boss. And so I was like, well, why don't you go to the head of inventory and they'll be your mentor, and you're going to learn a lot more and be more successful if you know what the other functional partners are doing within your organization. And then I would try and mentor people that were outside of my direct responsibilities. And also just, for me, it wasn't just about growing the business. Don't tell Eric, Carrie, but like, it was more about, I really cared about the people and their path. And one of the hardest things to do is hiring, and Carrie knows this very well. Hiring good people is extremely difficult. And whenever I found somebody that I was like, okay, there's a gem in that person, she or he can grow, I invested my time and my resources and my connections in helping that person grow and be successful. And I was really lucky that, people at Deloitte & Touche, at Kaiser Permanente, at Williams-Sonoma also did that for me and gave me opportunities to step outside my box, try new things, fail, succeed. So yeah, and that was, so hiring is one thing. And then another thing that I learned along my career path, which helped me like being a mentor and wanting people to have me mentor them, is I always gave credit where credit is due. Like if somebody on my team who might have been a couple levels down did all the work and I'm presenting it to the board, I'm presenting it to the CEO, I'm like, well, Julie did everything and she had help from Rob, and, and they might not even know who they are, but I just had to get their name out there. And then when succession planning comes and, you're figuring out who's going to be promoted and when, like, I was like, remember, they did that report. I really, give credit where credit is due is a big thing for me. And I also think being a senior executive, like I don't know everything, and that's okay. I shouldn't know everything. So you have people on your team, and you always hire smarter than you are, is my opinion. Like I never felt threatened by any of my really good hires. I was like, ooh, that's a good hire. And if, they got promoted, that's good for me. And I would always hire people that complemented my skill set. So yeah, I know marketing and e-commerce, but I don't know a lot about finance. So, I might hire somebody on my marketing team who can run spreadsheets all day long. So anyway, that's kind of a little off topic, but that's
So I would love to add in here, because this is on my list of things to talk about. So hiring is something that when I would hear CEOs come and talk to us at Stanford, no one ever talks about how hard it is to find the right people. And Danielle just touched on it, that like you reward your hypos, right? And the harder part for me is, and this is where again Danielle's a good sounding board, is that like there's so much like shame in saying, hey, I thought this person was great, and here we are 180 days later, and shit, I made the wrong decision, right? And I would say that, and then I'm like, oh, all right, just if that's how you're feeling, they're not putting up numbers, you gotta let them go. And part of it is, again, being completely authentic and vulnerable. Part of it is I'll sit back and I'll be like, where the hell did I go wrong? Right? Like, and I'm like, Carrie, like, you gotta stop beating up yourself. And everyone is guilty of this, right? Like, I'm going through it right now. And then number two is like, I'll like feel like so nauseous for 2 days because I know that conversation is coming. And then I'll say to myself, well, you wouldn't be human if you didn't feel bad about it, right? Because again, this is an enjoyable activity. So I would say the other thing with hiring too, the flip side is just firing. And I think the biggest thing I learned as the company keeps on going bigger and bigger, once I'm able to really spend a lot of money, really start succession planning, right? Because what happens right now is, and one of the reasons why, all kidding aside, why I haven't like had a week off, is because every time I fire someone, I go in there and play, head up. So right now I'm head of marketing, and I'm kind of carrying some ops stuff a little bit. But again, like that's because I am so keen to seeing where the blind spots are that I have to help. And I think this is probably what makes me a good CEO, is that I jump in to clean up those fires. I don't let the fires happen, right? But when I see those sort of, I would say, those red flags, and Danielle always says to me, this is why you're such a great CEO, I will sit on it for a week, but I'll wake up and be like, all right, this is done. How much severance are we going to give, right? I don't take 8 months to make the decision. I do try and have a plan in place and say, okay, I'm going to do this, this, and this. But I will say hiring is one thing, but firing is equally as important, because I've seen CEOs keep on dead weight for 2 years, and all that's done is just really get them up a wall. And the other thing too is, the way I think about it is that, I work really hard to raise money for this company, and that really results in equity. And so the more someone stays and the more their equity starts vesting, is that really fair that they're going to get a piece of the company on everyone else's shoulders? So this is a lot to think about. But yeah, hiring and firing, I think, is so much more difficult than raising capital, even in this environment where I've never seen a hiring market as crazy as it is today.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And not only if somebody on your team is not cutting it in terms of performance, it's also the social emotional aspect. Like they bring the morale down of the team and the organization. And that's sort of like a hidden huge cost that, can be detrimental.
Thank you. Thank you both for speaking to these really human aspects of bold leadership. And I'd like to just let our audience know that if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A, and hopefully we'll have a few minutes at the end to get to those questions. So please feel free to put those as we continue. And with this, I'll invite Howie on to take the next portion of the conversation forward.
Hi, I don't really have control over my video, so I'll let somebody else figure that out. But, oh, there we go. So, one of the challenges when you're so successful and yet still so young is like, how do you define success in your own career? And, how do you allow yourself the latitude of feeling successful and not necessarily always pushing yourself, but at the same time, not, quote, resting on your laurels? So how do you set expectations for yourself, and how do you define success going forward? And we could start with either of you.
So for me, Howie, that's a great question, because I think about that often. To me, success is being able to have some exit event that can get my investors back their money. And I say that my investors, not even my own personal wealth, because Danielle, Eric, Phil, and took a chance on this person who was never a CEO, right? And it could have gone many different ways. And the greatest gift I feel like as a thank you I can give them is giving them back an exit. But so that's how I will define success for the company. For me personally, every time I get an email from a patient thanking me, I'm disabled, I have 2 kids, I haven't been able to go to the pharmacy, thank you for working so hard. That's how I define success daily, because I think if I wait for some magic sort of unicorn, event to happen, I'll be terribly, overwhelmed all the time and fixated on that. So for me, I would just say it's really, and the last measure of success for me is just a dream of mine is to be listed on one of these best places to work type of things, right? And so for me, it's having a team who truly respects my leadership. And right now I can say I do have that team, but it's also me navigating different generational changes, right? So you saw I introduced myself with my pronouns. That's very much something that we've started off in the company. I do it now just on a regular basis because it's just part of my name, I feel like. But again, there's so many different ways of success. I define success, and there's just no one right answer.
Yeah, I think I'm older than Carrie, so early on in my career, I definitely success for me was getting promoted, moving up the food chain, making my numbers. There's nothing like the rush of having a really good, solid presentation to senior leadership or to the board. And we were a public company reporting to the street on great numbers. That was so fulfilling for me on a professional level, but on a personal level, as I alluded to earlier, was having a team that I adored, and I cared about them, and just being a working mother and seeing my team, start getting pregnant was just, I was like, you can do it. You can stay in this workforce. Look, this is great. And then helping them through that and, helping them with, it's hard to go back to work after you have a child. So that was really rewarding for me to sort of mentor these young women who I believed in. And as Carrie alluded to, it's if you find, a gem on your team, you invest in them and you promote them and you give them accolades, and obviously you reward them financially, but also with more responsibilities. And another thing that helped me succeed is I had to make sure that in every role I've ever had, in my current one, is you have to like what you're doing at the end of the day and who you're doing it with. So not only is it, otherwise your days are going to be so long and boring. So I always wanted to stay challenged. I wanted to push myself. I wanted to learn something new every day. And I wanted to help others, to help me get my job done. But yeah, so I guess that's sort of, in a nutshell, what I would define success as. And just now at this sort of later stage in my career, helping advise companies on behalf of Goodwater is so rewarding for me. I do have some expertise that some of these companies have never thought of. Obviously, they know a lot more than I do about their business, but sometimes I'll say XYZ and they're like, you're a genius. And I'm like, no, I'm not. I did that before. So, being able to offer some tidbits here and there has been really rewarding for me.
Listening to both of you, you really come across as authentic leaders, people who are able to lead with influence, even in the face of also having authority. And I'm wondering what other tools or strategies do you use to achieve success, or do you think other business leaders should rely on more that you have found successful as a tactic or strategy for advancing both you as well as your firms?
So for me, we have a lot of digital distractions in our life right now. So one of the things makes me a good leader is I don't go on Instagram, I don't WhatsApp, I don't text in the workday, right? Which my workday is called 8 to 8 because I have a West Coast team as well. And so for me, focus is huge. And also it's a non-negotiable because I go to bed at 10 p.m. every night because of my disease. I need 8 to 9 hours of sleep. And so because I have that maniacal focus during the day, I'm able to get exactly what I have to get accomplished, right? So I hear my friends all the time, oh, I can't get it done. I have to be up till noon. I'm like, well, I see you Instagramming at 12 o'clock. So I'm not sure I can tell you why you're not getting done. So for me, it's having a maniacal focus. I think from the leadership side, it's just, even though I'm focused, having just pockets in my day where I'm problem solving with people, right? 50% of my time are people issues. And, I tell Danielle, I'm like, oh, this is common sense. Why do I need to be pulled in? But apparently it's not common sense. And so for me, it's always being available to my team when they need it in quote unquote crisis mode, but also having, I think, as a leader, just being focused to be able to get focus and planning. And my team knows, I'm like, if I don't have a deck 6 p.m. the night before for me the next day, we're not going to have the meeting. And like, Carrie, what do you mean? I'm like, I want to make my meetings 15 or 20 minutes. So if you send me the deck the night before, I comment on it, we talk about those things, boom. Because again, the way I see people wasting time is these hour-long meetings where you sit back and shoot the shit. That's not what we're here for. So again, I think for me, just having a diligence, a focus, and just a cadence, Howie, is how I would say my team has come to respect me for, pardon my French, just getting shit done.
Yeah, I would agree. Like, if you are presenting to the CEO or senior leadership team, you better be ready and have all your ducks in a row, and you need to have submitted your information to that audience well beforehand. Carrie has zero time. Like, she is like running, and nobody does at the top. And at the top, Carrie thankfully gets her sleep, but a lot of people don't. And with this new, world of e-commerce and 24/7, and Christmas Eve is, not even a holiday. You're running. So as a person at a lower level, you better be ready with your thoughts. And it's okay to go in with, so this is what I'm struggling with. Can you help me with this? But one thing I always found in my career is when people would come in and complain to me and be like, so-and-so and this and XYZ, and I don't know. And I'm like, well, what are you going to do about it? Like, don't come to me with a problem without proposed solutions. And then I will help you either with that solution or give you other ones that I think might help. So I never dealt well with complainers.
And Howie, can I add one more thing here? Because I'm going through it right now. It's trusting my gut, right? So for some reason, I blame my parents. I have a high EQ and a high IQ, which is a blessing and a curse, right? So I can look at a spreadsheet and I'll say, because my background's finance, that number is wrong, which happened 2 days ago. And people are like, no, it's not. I'm like, go back, check your assumptions. I'm telling you that number is wrong. Last night, I got a bridge, which for those of you who don't know is like what Carrie got day one, what Carrie's getting now, and explain the differences. And the differences were so astounding. At the meeting prior, I was like, guys, like, I was right. And this bridge is awful, right? And so, and the question I say is, who here messed up, right? And so again, like as Danielle said, like I am truly tough because it's the data, the answer is always in the numbers. And I think that's again one of the things that I do really well is I understand how the dynamic of data and really use the data to run the business.
We're getting questions in at this time, and I know we've saved time at the end for questions, but I'm still going to try to start weaving some of them in now, if that's okay with the other folks. And one of the first ones that had come in is about imposter syndrome, which, honestly, in my circle, I'm not sure I've met people who have not experienced imposter syndrome. So instead of asking if you've experienced it, and you can say so or not, but how do people overcome it, or how do you counsel other people who work with you who experience imposter syndrome to overcome that?
So I did suffer badly from in the first 4 months, and the way I overcame it was when I negotiated the job, I said I need an executive coach. So from day one, I had an executive coach, and the way I also did it too is like part of the syndrome is you just know what you don't know, right? So I hire people who are smarter than me in different domain expertise. And my coach said to me, literally in the middle of the pandemic, I don't understand why you're seeing what you're seeing and why I'm seeing what I'm seeing. And she's like, imposter syndrome is very real, but you need to get over yourself, right? And I was like, because I don't know this CEO gig, like I don't work on spreadsheets anymore. I don't get to build awesome decks. And she's like, because that's not your job, right? So she's like, let's figure out like what your job is. And so we kept on working on it and bubbling up in the conversation. And it wasn't necessarily imposter syndrome. It's just, I lacked confidence I can do the job, right? Which I guess is, so what we did is, this is going to sound very goofy, but she's like, Carrie, you got to download this app called, I think it's called Think Up. I can look at it for anyone that knows it. And you record your voice and for 3 affirmations. And the affirmation was like, you're a badass, you can solve shit, and every problem has a solution. And I listened to that app every morning while I was brushing my teeth. And all of a sudden overnight, I was like, I know I can do this, right? Like, and again, like as evidenced by what I've put up. And so I have moments of it. I had a moment of it when was Kimchi Gate in September. But again, like I just had to remind myself that like you can't let little blips in the chart really own you. You need to own those what I like to call learnings and not mistakes. So again, for me, it's just believing in myself. The data answers it. Like, why would I think I can't do it? Look at what I've done already, right? So that's kind of it's very real, but you got to work on it and just tell yourself that you're awesome and amazing.
Danielle?
I think Carrie answered that question perfectly. I agree. It's like we're all going to make mistakes, but it's a learning. It's that so move on from it. And as Carrie alluded to earlier in the conversation, like hiring mistakes are really painful because it takes a long time to figure them out. And yeah, it's 180 days, and you're like, what did I do? And train this person and spent so much time and resources on them, and they're really just not the right fit either for that position or for the organization. So that's like, oh, and then you have to like start over. And as Carrie mentioned, as the leader, the buck stops with you. So she has to pick up those pieces and she has to be the CMO, whereas she's running a like startup that's like going like this. And for me as like an investor mentor, I'm like, oh, but you want to make your numbers. But at the end of the day, she has to run the business in order to make those numbers later. So yeah, so it's learning from your mistakes and not dwelling on them. Just what can I do better next time?
If you think back, and you're certainly welcome to say nothing, but I imagine not. What would you do differently if you were starting your career? We have a lot of people in the audience who are doing their MPH program or other graduate degrees at Yale right now. Some of them may even be undergraduates. What would you do differently if you were starting off at that position right now, knowing what you know today? And that can include coursework, degrees, or different career paths, whatever you would like.
Yeah, for me, just taking advantage, like college and graduate school is a gift. Like, you don't have huge rent. Obviously you've got huge student loans, but it's a gift. So taking advantage of every single opportunity, any class, any lecture, any mentorship opportunities. One thing that I did at my undergrad at Stanford was I sought out this psychology professor, Phil Zimbardo, who was like the best psychologist in the country at the time. And I was like a freshman. I'm like, hey, will you be my faculty support and will you do this? And he was like, sure. And I just had, I hate to say it, the balls to like go in there and be like, I want a meeting with this guy and I want you to help me. And he did, like for the next 4 years. So, take advantage of that. And at Yale, think about the faculty and staff and the support that you have there, and tell a professor maybe that's in a different, function, be like, do you have time for coffee? These professors and associate professors and staff, they love to help. That's why they're there. That's why they're working at these, large, wonderful institutions and universities. So take advantage of all the connections you have there, but also the people that you're going to meet. I find that later in my career, it's like, oh, I went to college with so-and-so. Oh, I went to Yale with so-and-so. Those connections are super strong. So that not only the peers that you meet, where you are right now, but take advantage of all of the resources you have. And for me, it's namely the people and the staff and the professors. It's such a gem that you guys have that opportunity, and you might not have that later. Once you get into the workforce, these awesome people are not going to be at your fingertips anymore.
And I think the other thing I would say too is like in 2012, so maybe 5 years after business school, I hired a coach and we mapped out like perfect world, where do you want to be in 10 years, right? And then we mapped out everything that we thought going back from that day to 10 years to come back what I needed, right? So what we said was, I'd never managed people. So the next job we need to have, we're managing people. Or I didn't do marketing. So a job where I can learn marketing, as Danielle alluded to before, she actually took a step back to take 4 steps forward, right? So I was always making career choices to get me to where I want to go. The biggest regret I have, and this is just my personality, is I wish I had more patience because it's all worked out, but I can't tell you how many times I would say, I felt quite frankly a little bit depressed because that 10-year plan wasn't working out, and shame on me, jokes on me, but but it has worked out, right? So I just want to say too, like, you have to be patient. Don't put so much just stress on in yourself if you have a vision and you keep on working at it, because again, that's something that, I find mental health to me is equally as important as physical health. And so when you put so much pressure on you to make these, these goals, sometimes it can really affect your mental health. So my biggest thing I wish I'd done differently is patience and enjoyed the time off between jobs I had versus stressing myself out.
The pandemic has affected everybody in ways big and small. How has it affected you and your work? And don't be afraid to tell us about silver linings or positive changes that have come from that, if that is what comes to mind, but either side.
I think they're both good and bad that happen, right? Number one is, imagine first time CEO, it feels like 10 years ago. And within, I think, day 3, I'm writing an email to a scary board who I had never met before. And I was like, hey, just so you don't know me, but a couple of things I want to do. I'm going to cut my salary and I'm not going to renew our office lease. And I had employees like, you're so not making the right decision. And I was like, team, I'm old enough to know this isn't going to be a 2-week journey, right? And so I just say, for me, was just making those decisions very fast. I had lived through 9/11, 2008. So I had seen this tape, in some form or fashion before. So that was, I think, and then number 2, we were one of the companies that thrived. Between all of us, the company I took over was not in the best financial shape. And so I had to deal with a lot of issues. And so navigated that. And then, so we thrived. I'm not sure we would have been here today if we didn't have the pandemic, as I look back on it. And then lastly, I think that the hard part was, I had never been a work from home type of person. Like, I never believed you can be as successful. And I had to flip that attitude really quickly. And, for a while, for a year, I grew a company 900% on my couch in Brooklyn, right? So I would just say not ideal, a lot of, back pain, a lot of leg pain, but, there's good and bad. And then for the shining moment, just we were able to help probably over 80 or 90,000 patients. So life happens, Javi. I can't say it's good or bad. I think as a country, we've had a lot of learnings. I think personally for me, just a little bit of a reality check of how short and how precious life could be.
And I think Carrie said it best. For me, actually the pandemic, just in my work, because I work with companies, all over the world and in Canada. Yes, I would have gone to a board meeting in Canada, but it's kind of nice to not have to do that. And for me, Zoom has actually worked. Carrie and I have actually never met physically, and we talk every week. And she hasn't met Eric, who is, my awesome partner at Goodwater. And it actually doesn't matter. Like, I feel like I know her better than some of my, greatest friends. So, and also the one thing, as everybody knows on this call with Zoom, is you can do it anywhere at any time. So it's pretty funny with my kids' school. Like, I actually go to most all the meetings now, whereas before it was maybe 20%.
Yeah, that's great. Just a reminder that we still are inviting you to submit questions to us, and we can take them one at a time. And for those that we don't get to, we can forward them to our guests today. I'll ask one quick final question from me before we go to the audience questions. Quick, you've given some advice already, but best single point of advice for students and recent alums.
Danielle, here you go. Let me think about that.
And best advice is, I think I alluded to this a little bit earlier in the conversation, is take advantage. Well, when you're at school, take advantage. And then after, I feel like my public health degree, and a lot of it was in epidemiology, which is something a field I did not go into, but the backgrounds and learning of having that coursework has helped me. I mean, you're solving problems and puzzles, you're trying to figure out the origin. I mean, that happens in any business. You're always solving problems and you always need people to help you do that. So, after having the base and the confidence to, start my career, I went straight to Deloitte and Touche, but I felt comfortable. I could, I was very good at writing because we had to, write our dissertations, and, but that was like, 200 pages long, and I had to learn how to get it down to like, you know, a 5 bullet point email that I'm going to send to a client and all that. So yeah, so it was basically taking, you know, my education, what I'd learned, and feeling confident and going into the workforce with that base, but also morphing it into a business environment. So in my education, I didn't have a lot of business experience, so I had to kind of learn that on the fly. I'm sure that's changed with some of your students taking classes at the School of Management. But at the time when I was at Yale, the management health program was not as robust. So, but I knew that that was what I wanted to do. So I kind of used the epidemiology and my learnings from all of that and kind of morphed it into business practice, if that makes sense.
And I think Danielle said it best, is that sometimes you would take a step backwards, take a step forward. So, you know, if someone's like, I actually can't hire you now, but do you want to do an internship or a consulting project? Don't ever pass on that opportunity. I can't tell you how many times I've had friends who've done projects that turn into full-time jobs. And the second thing I would say too is that, you know, LinkedIn is a great tool if you want, like you, but what I would say though, when you send a LinkedIn email, to Danielle's point, make it short, make it to the point, and think like, why would the CEO want to respond to me, right? Like what? So basically, you know, what value can you add? So last 2 weeks ago at Cornell, and I haven't figured out how I'm going to solve this yet. I had a student write me and say, hey, you know, it's really hard when you're in military to get birth control, and she had a compelling email. And so I wrote her back and I was like, hey, like, would love to chat, you know, here's my email. And so again, like, I spend 100% of my day chatting, but I carve out time, because if an email is well written to the point, how they can add value to the company, I will make time for that. I can always make 30 minutes, right? So I just think the other thing too is like, you know, I wouldn't DM someone on Instagram or I'd look at their name on LinkedIn, but I think LinkedIn is a powerful tool if you use it correctly.
Yeah, I totally agree. And as Carrie mentioned, as you're, you know, in your career path, do not hesitate to take a step or 4 step back. It's the best thing I did. And it was very scary. And I cut my salary in half, and my nanny made more than I did for 2.5 years. But it was so worth it for me because I knew what I wanted to do. And, you know, at the end of the day, as we discussed, it's like you have to love what you're doing and who you're doing it with.
Great. I'll just invite our other panelists back up here. And I'll let Fatima start with the questions, or Kaveh.
I have one question, if you don't mind. I think mentorship came up so many times, and I'm just wondering, it seems like it's such an impactful tool. And for women who are from low-income communities, maybe they haven't graduated from a, you know, Ivy League school, etc. Are there mentorship possibilities, resources? Are there companies that are offering mentorship to women of color from low-income communities? Is that happening? I'm just wondering what your thoughts are, whether you have any information.
Probably not, if you want to be completely blunt. But what I do is if I have someone like from SCO, which is a organization for people of color that I was a member of, someone writes me again, it's all about the email, right? Like, not, hey, what's up? Like, you know, we're not friends, right? Like, I see it happen all the time, like, what up? And I'm like, excuse me, like, you don't even know me. So I would just say, I'm always open, Kaveh. And, you know, I was talking to someone yesterday who does something like that. It's called Pure Health Exchange. But once this company really has a solid foundation, piece of what we talk about at Simple Health is, you know, DEIB, right? Like, everyone takes for granted everyone has a phone, and they may, but not everyone has unlimited data. Not everyone has, you know, all these fancy things that we take for granted. So my big vision, which Danielle doesn't know about, but she'll know about right now, here I am. But my vision for the company is that one day I can, you know, step down and run a nonprofit arm of Simple Health, where we can do some CSR stuff. And again, like, you know, diversity is very important to me. I wanted, the headline, we had an offsite a couple of weeks ago, and the headline was, and again, this is when my imposter syndrome kicked in. We all did a design thinking session, and the headline was Carrie Subak, CEO of Simple Health, creates the most diverse company and patient base, and all while taking a company public at a $6 billion valuation, which is such a great dream. But I told the team, like, we can take the billions down a little bit, but Kaveh is always at the front of my mind how I can be a change agent in that conversation in this country.
Yeah, and there's never enough. And locally in the Bay Area, there are some organizations that help with this. But yeah, it's never enough. But I am on the board of a nonprofit local science museum, and we did just create an arm for diversity. And we have a program, Museums for All, allowing, you know, access for low income families to come free of charge. Then we have transportation issues. You know, it's a lot, but there's never enough. But for a tiny nonprofit to dedicate resources and time to do this is huge when they don't have a lot of money. So it's happening slowly, not fast enough.
So we have a question from the audience asking, what is your advice for us early in our career to find leaders and supervisors that will support and build us up in the same way?
I think early in your career, you know, and as I mentioned earlier, you know, I had some balls. I went into the top psychologist professor in the country and just said, hey, you know, but I had a plan. I was very prepared. And it was like, I would like, because otherwise he'd be like, what do you want me to help you with? I was like, this is what I'd like you to help me with. And he put me in touch with a TA, like, you know, go work for him and, you know, come back to me. And so early in your career, I would not, the senior leadership team is super busy. And as Carrie mentioned, if she gets a LinkedIn with like, what's up, she's not going to respond. But if you have, you know, short, succinct, you have an idea like this woman in the military, how do I get birth control? You know, that's so valid and that's going to get someone's attention. So if you have an idea early in your career for your company or role or for your organization, just bring it to fruition. And I'll never forget, as an assistant buyer at Williams-Sonoma, there were so many inefficiencies. I cannot handle inefficiencies, which is why I'm an operational person. And I was like, you know, it was like on a photo shoot, you know, shooting cattle. I was like, this is ridiculous. You're spending $10,000 a day to have 5 people on set. I can get this done. You need to change to digital photography, like all this stuff. And I was like, nobody. And I put together this tiny business plan that was very digestible, and it went all the way to the top. And suddenly they were like, who's this girl? Like, who is she? So, you know, I wouldn't, early in your career, you know, take calculated risks and, you know, make those connections. And if you hit it off with somebody in the elevator who's a senior executive, just say, hey, if it's true, you know, you have to be transparent. So if it's true and you really admire this person and what they're doing and how they lead, say, hey, I love with XYZ what you did. If you ever have time for coffee, I would love to pick your brain on a couple of things I'm thinking of. But again, be prepared for those conversations, because these people do not have a lot of time.
And to piggyback on that, I remember in my first year of investment banking, which if I think about my life story, I don't know how I ended up there. I had a senior managing director, for whatever reason, take an interest in me. And he would just be like, hey, I want to show you a couple of things. Like, don't ever be like, hey, I'm busy, I can't. Because if they're making time to take an interest in helping your career development because they see a shining star, don't be like, oh, no, I don't have time. I have to get my deck done. Right? Like I would say, okay, you know what? I'll stay up all night to get my work done, but I want to spend, you know, an hour with Andy. And it's just really funny because last week I did a podcast with another classmate of mine, and Andy actually wrote me, and he was like, I knew since 1997 that you would be a shining star. And I was like, really? Because I didn't. So, you know, again, like he saw something and I made the time for him, which is a different paradigm that Danielle is talking about, but it does go both ways. Like you should never be too busy if a senior person is like, hey, like want to grab coffee, or, you know, and take them up on that.
Yeah, I will never forget my internship was at William and Mercer back in the day, and a senior leader caught me on the fly and said, do you want to have lunch? And I said, I can't today. I will never. I was like, oh my God. And he never asked me again. I was just like, oh, because technically I couldn't. I had, you know, a meeting and, you know, 10 people. No, you take those opportunities.
Good point. Kaveh, did you want to ask a question or
I'm saying a couple of questions in the chat box. Maybe we should ask those. There is a question about managing stress. which I think you both talked about a bit, but how did you manage stressful situations in life while also working and going to school?
I can say for working right now, a couple things. Number one, and I'm being a little bit hypocritical here because I haven't done it in 3 weeks, but I usually try and work out 3 or 4 times a week, right? So you get that endorphins, you can kind of just take a minute and just shut down and focus on your body. But the second thing, which is I think is a bigger piece of it, is just, the power of your breath. So sometimes if you feel like an anxiety or your heart racing, I literally just sit and I just breathe for 5 seconds and just take care of like what truly is bothering you that's bringing this anxiety right on currently. And then like I figure it out or I go for a walk, right? But what I would say is that like as soon as I know myself long enough to like when that like stress is setting in, like your body gives you biological responses, right? Your heart starts racing or anything like that. And I'm just like, wow, okay, so I'm clearly stressed. Let me take a breath and I listen to my body. Again, like I was traveling for the last 2 weeks. I got home this week and I just was flat out exhausted. So I'm taking, the time to recoup and sleep. So again, like I equally take care of my mental stress as my physical stress because it's really how you fuel your drive in day to day.
Yeah, and I would say, yes, definitely always take time for yourself and for the people around you. I let my work sometimes get in the way of, my family and raising my children because I was so stressed out. And then the next day I'm like, I was so mean to them and I shoved them to bed and hopped back online. And, those precious, 15 minutes of reading a bedtime story is so much more valuable than, looking at your numbers and shit. That can wait 15 minutes. So, take time and appreciate the people around you. And also for those of you who have young kids, they grow up so fast. So, take that time, when you're stressed out and don't try not to parlay the stress on them or to your partners, which was a hard learning for me.
You've both given really great sage advice, and I just personally want to thank you before turning it back to Fatima. And thank you for sharing this time with us, and also to the audience. If any questions haven't been answered, we will forward them on to our guests. So thank you.
Yes, thank you all so much for joining us, and especially thank you, Danielle and Carrie, for sharing your time with us. We are going to be recording this, so if we'll be reaching an even wider audience than we reached today. So thank you, Kaveh. Any last words?
I just want to thank you. This was a very personal sort of conversation, which I think was hugely important, and I really appreciate you sharing all the sort of your journey to get to where you are. I think the students appreciate that. That's frankly not the kind of things we usually talk about in our classrooms. So I think this was very important. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.